please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
Hello and welcome to Big Deal. Today we have with us Aisha Sequeira, who's the head of investment banking team at Morgan Stanley India. Aisha, so good to have you on CNBC TV 18. Of course, we are halfway through the year 2018. How has the year been so far for Morgan Stanley's investment banking team, and do you see enough in the pipeline for the rest of the year?
I think this has been a very good year. As I think about both the type of transactions that are getting done, as well as the breadth of deals, it's very encouraging. So last year, if you looked at it, the deals were primarily domestic consolidation, driven by some very large deals like the Vodafone merger with Idea, and also Dish TV Videocon. We led both those transactions. This year, the good aspect of it is you've seen a combination of inbound as well as domestic consolidation. The domestic consolidation now is clearly driven by companies wanting scale and leadership and attempting to go for that, as well as the IBC process that is going to create some domestic consolidation opportunities. You've had a very strong consumer thematic, clearly driven, and technology. You've had one of the largest M&A deals ever with the Walmart Flipkart transaction.
Yes.
So you've got this year an even split of inbound transactions with domestic consolidation. What one hasn't seen as yet in India is outbound, and I think hopefully over the next couple of years we begin to see more of that.
So while we did not really expect so much of strategic interest coming in, but we've seen Fortis transaction, we've seen IBC related cases, and also consolidation that you mentioned. So there's a fair bit of strategic action as well. Do you think now the time is also ripe, or will it take some more time before these strategics also start going out?
So I think we just came out with a survey over the weekend that showed that consumer CEO confidence in India is at its highest level that we've seen over the last 10 years. The last few quarters of earnings results in India have also been very positive. So CEO confidence is a prerequisite to activity, both on the M&A side as well as on the capital raising side. And so I think that bodes well for the type of activity we're going to see over the course of the next couple of years. My sense is the pickup in outbound is still going to be slow. This is going to be for the next few years really an inbound domestic kind of market with some spewings of outbound in certain sectors. But there's still a lot to get done. I think for the first time in a few years we've seen this level of CEO confidence, which I think is very positive.
But do you think it being an election year could be a dampener, would push the investment decisions and decisions by the corporates?
I think it depends on what product you're talking about. A product like an M&A product is never a quarter-by-quarter product. If somebody decides they want to invest in India, they've decided they want to invest in India. Whether something slows down, momentum slows down for a quarter or two is not going to impact that conversation. I think if people today, you step back and you look at economies globally, I think India is one of those economies which has a very strong underlying fundamental growth underpinning to it, which is very difficult to come by. So structurally, we are a very strong economy. We've got inflation under control. You may have a few, months where the price of oil goes up, and so inflation edges up a little bit. But I think for the most part, people feel confident that you've got inflation under control. You've got earnings growth coming back. You're going to hopefully start to see some more capacity getting put on the ground. But then, you've really got one of the strongest consumer stories in the world.
Oh, yes.
When you look at it, median age of population being 26, 100 million Indians are expected to enter the workforce by 2025. Those are very difficult statistics or numbers to find in any other economy.
So good you mentioned consumption. There is a large M&A expected to happen in the consumption space as well. And this story has remained intact for past many years.
I think very few economies globally have the underlying consumer opportunity that India presents. We've got a 26-year-old median population, 100 million Indians expected to enter the workforce. by 2025.
Right.
And so when you look at that opportunity, really what it is who's going to help us execute on that opportunity. It is not whether the opportunity exists. And therefore what we're seeing across the board is track record, corporate governance are all key determinants when people decide which partner to pick or where they put their money. And so we've never seen a let up in that thematic. It's really been actionable opportunities, where really there've not been that many over the last few years. But consumer as a thematic, and it plays out in a number of different fields. It's financial services, which is also a consumer play. It's the basic consumer staple, CPG.
Yes.
In some ways, it's also been a real estate story. So there are a number of different sectors that play on the Indian consumer thematic.
Oh yes, it's a broad basket, but also the brand value that comes with the consumption space also is dependent on the brand valuation as well. So how do you see the valuation dynamics now that the markets seem very volatile and also the mid-cap space is really losing steam?
I think, really one has to look at fundamental value, when you look at valuation. And you cannot just look at valuation in an absolute. You have to look at valuation for growth. I think India has always traded at a little bit of a premium relative to some of the other economies. But then when you look at the underlying growth in India, one gets comfortable underwriting a high growth rate. And so it really comes down to the confidence level of the growth going to be underlying these opportunities. So, I think it is really a moment where people look and say, we want to invest in India. As you look at it over the next 10 years, there are very few opportunities, countries globally, I think, that give people this kind of underlying, just structural growth. And then I think on top of that, you really have to overlay, how can you rest assured that you're going to be able to execute on that growth? And that's where, as we've talked about, track record, credibility, corporate governance, all these things really matter today.
It's very interesting that in the past few years, the corporate governance dynamic has become one of the prime drivers for any particular transaction. In fact, in Fortis transaction also, we have seen so much of that really play out, and shareholders have had their say. But you did mention about the financial services space, Aisha. Of course, that was very ripe for a huge amount of consolidation, especially for pockets like housing finance, insurance. A lot of them did not materialize the way they were thought earlier. Now, we have seen many headwinds hit not just the PSU banks, but also the private sector, ripe for much more action when it comes to M&A going forward.
So I think consolidation as a thematic is something that's here to stay for leadership, and therefore sometimes regulations sort of develop as transactions get announced, and so those things play out over a period of time. But if you were to say over the next 5 years, is the sector going to be more consolidated? My assumption clearly would be yes. And so consolidation is an important thematic. I think the good thing is also consolidation is happening for the right reasons. It's happening because you bring a complementarity of skill sets, or someone is strong in one pocket and not in another. So the key between consolidation is that 1 + 1 needs to equal more than 2. And therefore, either through top line growth, where you can accelerate top line growth because you've been able to fill pockets that you didn't otherwise have, or white space that you didn't otherwise have, or you're going to be able to really get more efficient from a cost base, which will be able to help you really leverage, again, the top line. So the strategic rationale of a transaction in consolidation becomes very important. And if you looked at shareholders generally like to see consolidation because they see this really thematic of like 1 + 1 needs to equal more than 2.
The big consolidation that we saw, and you were involved, your iBanking team was also involved in it, was in the space of telecom and telecom towers. Idea Voda is one of the biggest consolidations that we've seen in India, and also the entire Infratel merger as well. So that's also something that you've worked on. So how do you see now telecom is now put to rest with the consolidation, and do you also agree with me when I say that difficult situations really call for more consolidation rather than when we are in a boom period?
I think consolidation happens for a number of different reasons. Sometimes I think what happens is a couple of players, come together and together are stronger than either one is individually. And so it is not that it needs to be a strong period or a weak period. It really needs to be coming together of the mindsets of the two management teams or the two shareholders to say that we can really create something better together than either of us could individually. And so I think that is going to be the driver of consolidation. In India, in the past, we've not seen much domestic consolidation. So if you look 5 years earlier, there was really not that much domestic consolidation because a number of industries were in their infancy in some ways, and everybody was just individually focused on going for growth. Yeah. As industries mature, that is the way,
but the promoter mindset has also matured, Aisha. Absolutely. I don't think the promoters were in line with the thought of, aligning with another Indian promoter. Yeah. They would rather sell it off to a foreign player, right? So has that mindset changed? And I would also like you to share, is it difficult to bring two Indian promoters on the same table to do a transaction?
I think there are lots of examples today of transactions where Indian promoters have come together to do deals. And so, I'm not one ever to generalize. I think across the board, each deal has its own nuances. Whether it's sort of a promoter or it's a founder shareholder. It is different people who come together who ultimately need to think on the same wavelength in order to get the transaction done. So generalization generally doesn't work.
No, not generalization. It's not just commercial because emotions and ego play an equal amount of role in it.
But
so is it a difficult task in India more than other places?
I think that's not just for promoters. That's for founder shareholders too. If you are really a founder shareholder and you've built your transaction from ground zero, you are emotional. If you wanted to exit or if you're going to merge with somebody else. So I think you see that across the board. You've not seen many promoter consolidation happen, but I think that, as you know, has begun to change.
Okay, and we've seen some bit of it in the e-commerce space. You've worked on certain transactions like Make My Trip and Ibibo and some of the others as well.
Right, I mean, we did, one of the largest consolidations last year, which was Dish TV Videocon. That was clearly two, Indian promoters coming together. We did Ibibo, Make My Trip. We've done Vodafone, Idea. We've been at the forefront of the domestic consolidation theme.
Yes. All right, so e-commerce space, is that ripe for more consolidation? We're going to see much more with now Walmart, Flipkart also being announced.
So I think you will see more M&A activity in technology broadly across the board, both e-commerce and beyond. I think, that transaction could take various forms. Last year we raised money for Big Basket, which Alibaba put in.
Much more with now Walmart, Flipkart also being announced.
So I think you will see more M&A activity in technology broadly across the board, both e-commerce and beyond. I think, that transaction could take various forms. Last year we raised money for Big Basket, which Alibaba put in. As we've talked about, we've done a lot of deals for Make My Trip over the last few years. You will see just more activity across the board. It is one of the most exciting spaces globally in terms of just the penetration of mobile internet users in India, together with the monetization story beginning. So I think when people look at that opportunity, plus a very young population, the user case is been made now in terms of the number of Indians that are on mobile phones.
All right, so what are you picking up with your various chats with your clients at this point? Which is that sector which hasn't seen consolidation, maybe ripe for it and here to come in the next few months or so?
So I think literally, as you've seen with M&A transactions globally, I don't think any sector, if you look at it over the course of the next 5 years, will not see consolidation.
Okay.
I think every sector will have consolidation, some more than others. You've just had you have a number of players in most sectors. At the end of the day, scale and leadership are very important criteria. If you look at it across the board, access to capital is a differentiator because that helps you fund your growth. Right. India is still an economy where we have a lot of growth ahead of us. CapEx is important. And a lot of times, capital does chase leadership opportunities, and therefore consolidation in many ways may be needed in order to really develop of a certain scale so you can attract the capital you need.
Which are the sectors you think will see maximum M&A action going forward, and what are the themes that are developing there?
So if you look at it today, you've seen a lot of M&A activity in financial services. You've seen in real estate. You've begun to see it in infrastructure. On the renewable side, you've seen a lot of consolidation taking place. On the technology side broadly. So as we've talked about, there are different reasons why it will happen in different sectors. But these sectors, I think, will be where a lot of activity is. Now you've got a very big sector, which has been the material sector, basic materials, which over the last few years has been quiet. But actually with a pickup in the underlying product values in all of those sectors, I think you'll see more activity there. You clearly saw the recent Tata Steel Bhushan transaction. You've got some large M&A deals happening in that space too.
In material segment as well, some of the cyclical commodity space, cement has also taken a lot of attention as well. But what do you have to say about the ECM transactions now that the markets have been volatile, gone out those higher levels that we had seen last year where it was a secular rise? This year, you think is going to be tough, and even the IPO pipeline looks like it's drying up apart from the filings which have already been done?
No, I think the IPO pipeline looks okay. Actually, it's both. I think where you're going to see the difference, and I think it's healthy in terms of ECM pipeline as you look at it over the next 12 months. Over the last couple of years, a lot of the IPO activity has been secondary capital being raised as part of the IPO. I think going forward, you're going to see a mix of both secondary and primary capital. And I think that's very healthy because, it shows you that people have confidence back in underlying growth when you begin to raise primary capital. And again, Nisha, I don't look at it from like literally a quarter to quarter. It's literally as we look at it over the next, 6 months, the next 12 months, in terms of conversations with our clients, people are feeling good. People are feeling that they're busy. We've had a period of volatility, between demonetization and GST. It was difficult for people to make a quarterly comparison or yearly comparison for the last 2 years. Now people feel that they can do that. And when you meet corporates, when you meet business leaders, there is a sense of confidence in their business that we've not seen for some time. And I think ultimately that will translate in people wanting to raise capital and win more M&A activity.
So you are saying that the corporates are looking much more confident. What can derail this momentum? What are the challenges that may come as a dampener?
So I think part of the confidence clearly that the business leaders are seeing is they're picking up from the consumer. I think it is really fundamental when you find out what is driving this confidence. It is really the fact that at the grassroots level they're seeing more activity happening, and so it's across the board.
Macros. Is that also something that can derail the overall momentum at this point, because crude is rising, rupee has weakened, election year as well? I
think those are intermediate effects. I mean, I think if you have a sustained inflation that goes up materially, which we don't see, as a result of the crude price increase, my sense is it's basically today the fact that the consumer feels good. They're spending more, and it's actually the good thing is it's not just happening in the top tier cities. It's happening across the board. The rural economy is playing a big part of the growth. And so the fact that the growth is broad-based also gives people confidence.
All right, so that aside, private equity players, they have played a very important role on the deal street. In fact, a large part of the transactions have been done by them. At this point, when rupee is not favoring their kind of returns, do you think exits will take a beating, and also the valuations now going down in the market? How are they positioned for the rest of the year when it comes to transactions?
So I think private equity and private capital in general, so not just private equity, but sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, the Canadian pension funds, have played a very big role in deal activity in India, and I don't see any abatement to that, both in terms of entry as well as in terms of exit. Okay. I think if you look at just the private capital getting raised for Asia investments, and then particularly for India opportunities, they are at unprecedented levels, and therefore that capital ultimately will find its home in countries and in companies where people see the ability to get a return. I think for those opportunities, what people want to see is who do we partner, who do we back, and therefore, we are starting to see larger transactions from private equity, where private equity have more meaningful say. Right. But I think that the thematic of seeing larger transactions, again, backing the right person, again, the corporate governance thematic comes in. I think that is that's a thematic that's here to stay, and I think that's very healthy for the economy and for the country overall. So finally, Aisha, in terms of revenues, would we be doing better than last year, than this year? Yeah, I think we're very bullish about the year. I think if I look at India today relative to the last 5 years, even last 3 years, I think we're in a materially different place. I think we've matured from a number of different aspects. I think there were tough years there where people had to buckle in and really find out what are your priorities. I think in markets like India that are so large, I think everybody has to focus on what your priorities are and what your strengths are. We at Morgan Stanley have the best investment bank globally. We truly believe that our global connectivity, the ability for us to connect capital from all over the world into India and India outbound, to showcase sort of content in terms of what's really driving opportunities. I think one of the incredible things that's happening globally is how disruptive industries are, and everybody has that concern as to what's happening in my space. The pace of change is incredible. Yes. And teams like us, I think, that have global sector knowledge, and we see what's going on everywhere in the world. We can see what's happening in the tech space in India and in China, and then how is that going to, in China and the US, and how is that going to impact India? Right. To be able to talk that, and I think to really be able to understand what happens next is very important. So we really are very bullish about what we see. All right. We think that the world is becoming smaller, and it really plays, to the strength of people like us. All right, so you're playing on your strength also of domain knowledge as well as in-depth, expertise. So good to chat with you, Aisha. Thanks so much for joining us on CNBC TV 18, and all the best for the rest of the year. Thank you. Thanks so much. That's the end of Big Deal. Thanks so much for tuning in.